Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of day 2 of Hudson Institute's Walter P. Stern Policy Conference. I'm Matt Hunter, Vice President for Strategic Partnerships here at Hudson. Through the sessions yesterday, I hope you will have a greater appreciation for the ability of our experts to analyze all the major geopolitical changes taking place. But one of the most important things that makes Hudson special is our experts' ability to look into the future and to understand and prepare for what's coming next. Few places anywhere in the world are doing this better than Hudson's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. Led by senior fellows Brian Clark and Tim Walton, the Center for Defense Concepts works with our uniformed services and policymakers to ensure that the United States is always at least one step ahead of our adversaries, and that our armed services remain the most technologically advanced anywhere in the world. Brian and Tim's work makes the United States military more lethal while keeping our warfighters and our country as a whole safer from danger. I'm so glad that we have Tim with us today to lead this session. Alongside Tim, it is an honor to have Major General Mark Mitchum of the United States Air Force with us. 1996 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, General Mitchum serves as commander of the Air Force's Integrated Capabilities Command. Some of you will recall that last year Hudson was honored to host Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General David Alvin, who described the need for the Air Force to recognize great power competition and conflict. Earlier this year, Major General Kunkel of Air Force Futures articulated elements of a new force design, and this morning with General Mitchum, we get to hear from the man who in many ways is responsible for translating that guidance and vectors into operational concepts and capability requirements across the force to build an Air Force that wins. Now for the really cool part, General Mitchum brings to his role experience in a variety of fighter aircraft, most recently in the F-22. He's had an illustrious history of command in the Air Force, the Air National Guard, and assignments in Europe, the Middle East, the Pacific, and here at home. And numerous decorations, including the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. We are grateful for his extraordinary service to our country and for being with us this morning. Thank you, General. Tim and General Mitchum, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you all for joining us this morning. It's a real pleasure to have General Mitchum join us for a conversation. As all of you may have seen in the news, the Air Force is extremely active all across the world. Every day, it's projecting power in support of U.S. interests, it's defending the homeland, and it's deterring nuclear conflict day in and day out. Despite this, in many ways, the Air Force right now is the oldest, smallest, and least ready it's ever been. And this is taking place during a period of time where we're facing a peer adversary in China that has highly advanced technology, the world's largest industrial capacity, and it's been very focused on how to defeat the U.S. Air Force on the ground, in the air, and just making our operations less effective and efficient. So in response, as Matt alluded to, the Air Force has been reoptimizing for great power competition, reorganizing itself, and developing new approaches to fight more effectively in the future. General Mitchum is leading many of these efforts, and we're honored to have you here this morning. Thanks, General.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Wanted to start, and my plan is for us to have a conversation for a period of time and then open up the floor to your questions. Start by asking you, what's the need for this nascent organization you're now leading first, and then additionally, how are you in Integrated Capabilities Command trying to use your analysis to accelerate and improve the capabilities requirements process?
Great. Well, thanks, Tim. And I want to say thanks to everyone for having me here, and thanks to Hudson for the tremendous work that you've done. We talked about the force design work. I look forward to talking about some of the industrial-based work that's going on right now in the mobilization. I'm fascinated by that, and it's mirrors some of the things that we talk about in the places we need to go. So this has been very formative for the Air Force, particularly the force design work with General Alvin, and I've had the opportunity to meet both with General Alvin and General Kunkel already this morning. So these things do all tie together, and we're all working very collaboratively under the Chief's guidance to move forward, and you all are directly impacting that, so I want you to know that. I also want to say thank you to Sarah and David, I think, potentially, for the opportunity to talk at this particular conference. It's the namesake is an Air Force veteran, I believe, early on, so it's especially exciting to be here and with this august audience to talk about specific role of the Air Force and where we're headed in a consequential time. And I ran into someone, talking in here. It is not boring, and I imagine you have plenty of things to talk about, at your conference right now. But we're thrilled you're doing it, and thanks for engaging. So let me talk briefly about the Integrated Capabilities Command. I think I'll get to both of your answers. If I miss one, Tim, please keep me honest there. So, we've looked at the organization, the structure of the United States Air Force. And like any large organization, you tend to build an organization based on the needs and the environment in which you live. We have built an organization that has done amazing things for America, for our airmen, for our joint force, and frankly, I think for the world. But that organization is largely built around functional lines. It's built around, frankly, weapon systems. It's kind of how we as technologists in the Air Force, it's part of our DNA. And that's served us well. And we have amazing airmen and civilians and contractors supporting us around the world, around the United States, helping us to try to build an Air Force to meet the nation's needs. What we've seen as technology has advanced, the changing character of war, as threats are advancing at a significant pace, as Tim mentioned, that the functional view of the world is not meeting the needs of how we need to build a system of systems approach to bringing capabilities to bear, and really prioritizing the enterprise approach over individual weapon systems, if you will. So that's the genesis of Integrated Capabilities Command, currently in our provisional status that I command. We are standing up an organization that's trying to privilege the enterprise view, to bring all these disparate activities together, not get rid of them, but ensure they're synchronized to produce the right outcomes. So I think about three things we're trying to do to realize this, and you'll probably hear me say it a couple times as we go through this. The first thing is we're trying to ensure that we are prioritizing mission over function. That requires organizational changes that we're carrying out in ICC. We'll talk about some of those, but predominantly through the ICC lens, to ensure that it's not just about individual weapon systems, but how they come together to produce an effect in time and space. The second thing we're focused acutely on is accelerating the delivery of capability to our airmen and to our warfighters. Moving from years or decades in some cases to, with the current environment we'll talk about, it could be as short as weeks and months with some of the capabilities we could bring to bear in the future state. And that ties back to some of the force design work that Hudson's helped with. And the third thing is about improving the efficiency and effectiveness of every dollar that we have. I particularly focus on the investment accounts. That's our RDT&E and our procurement accounts when we get to the money side of that. But we can do all the theoretical work we want to do about where we want a force design to be, how we think we should get capability to the field. At the end of the day, though, it's about how we spend our money to make that real. So we're really trying to link to the resourcing, and that is a challenge in our enterprise. It's been a challenge for the Air Force in the past to actually make these things real. So those are the three things: mission over function, accelerating delivery capability to our warfighters, and the last one where I really talk about it now is improving lethality per dollar. The most effective, efficient way to spend every dollar we have. And if someone wants to give us more money, to prove to them how we would spend that more money and how it would buy down risk for America. And that's part of the more Air Force that General Alvin talks about. So look forward to carrying on that discussion. I'll transition to the analysis question.
Please.
So part of that is we must bring a level of rigor and frankly consistency and stability to the Air Force portfolio. We have to bring that over time. That requires a level of consistency, of rigor and analytical basis for what we do, where things change when the threat changes, when the technology changes, when the fiscal environment dramatically changes. But we're not, say, chasing our tail here, and every year we have a significantly different story, whether it be inside the Pentagon or on the Hill, or to industry who's having to make investment decisions for IRAD and CapEx expenditures. So we're trying to bring that consistency. That requires the analysis. We have a lot of work to do there. We have to build, there's a lot of great analytical organizations inside the Air Force, but there's pieces that are missing that we are building, and that's going to take years in some case for us to build out where I think we really need to go for ICC. But in the near term, what we're doing today is we're taking this mission thread view of the world, and that's connecting nodes, a kill chain, any nodal analysis you do in a corporate setting, and it's saying, how do we connect these things, and then what's the constraint on the system? We have a little bit of a tendency, well-intended, to think about, how do we take a pointy thing that goes 10% further and put it on a pointy thing that goes 10% faster? But what if the thing that's actually impeding our ability to achieve the effect in the time and space against an adversary is a $5,000 server rack in the basement of a dirty ops center out on an island somewhere? It's actually quite hard for us to know. So we're trying to do that connection across all the pieces so we give a whole capability to our airmen and toward the Joint Force commanders, the combatant commanders in the future. So the first piece you really see us doing is that analytical rigor to focus on that mission thread, that horizontal way to view all these functions across the Air Force, Tim.
Makes a great deal of sense. One of the areas of analysis I wanted to ask you on is on nuclear mission. Right?
Yes.
It's a core function, core mission of the Air Force. What's ICC's sort of remit or role in terms of looking at that nuclear analysis or strategic deterrence analysis?
Thank you. And you'll hear the chief talk, that we have two number one priorities in the Air Force, defense of the homeland and the nuclear mission. And, that is core to our DNA as an Air Force, the nuclear mission. And it's core to our sacred responsibility to America. So when we think about the nuclear mission, we understand we have 2/3 of the triad when it comes to the weapons. We have the vast majority of oversight of our NC3, our nuclear command and control and communication system. So the Air Force has a massive role in the nuclear enterprise. And we can never get that wrong. Mm-hmm. So we understand when we look at it from a capabilities perspective, and we look at it from an integrated capabilities perspective, as ICC is doing, we believe as a core mission of the Air Force that you have to look at the whole Air Force. So that means we have to include the nuclear enterprise as part of all those discussions. And we see that whether it be the NC3, the communications, the command and control, there's tremendous overlap between that and what we need to do, especially in the future fight, with our conventional forces. They are not necessarily distinct. There's portions that must be and should be based on the capability or the resilience required unique to that mission, but it should only be different where it needs to be, where it actually adds value. Same thing, there's capabilities. We think about some of our dual role platforms, think B-21 in the future, B-52 in its current state, where there are things we can do that serve both sides of the mission, and they're actually complementary. I will say right now in our functional view of the world, it is actually quite difficult for us to see and prioritize where that overlap comes together and say, hey, a little bit of value here and a little bit of value here might not quite get up above the noise level, get out of squelch, if you will. But when you put those two things together and how they interface, actually that's something we really should prioritize. Right now, it's very hard for us to do that in the Air Force. So that's my pitch for why I think we should look at the whole enterprise, including the nuclear, inside any type of capability development work we do in the future. That said, in our current state, we also understand that from a change management perspective, we're going fast. We are going very fast in ICC and how we bring together these disparate functions across the Air Force. Pretty high risk, I think appropriately high risk. Mm-hmm. Those words in the nuclear enterprise don't go together. So we understand that we are taking, the chief has asked us to and given us direction, we're taking a more deliberate path on how we integrate nuclear capabilities into the work we're doing in ICC. Congress also helped us be prudent in that by some language in the 25 NDAA, Section 1631, that says before any of those functions were to move outside of Global Strike's purview to ICC or any major changes in the process would require a report, a plan to Congress, and we're engaging with those stakeholders. So right now, we are absolutely complying with the statute, and those functions have not changed inside Global Strike. We work collaboratively with my counterparts down there, with General Bussier, with General Newman, doing the 5-8 work down there. So we work hand in hand but we have not changed any of those processes now. And we'll have a discussion with the stakeholders, Stratcom, as well as our partners on the Hill about the right way forward and make sure we do it correctly, because we can't get that one wrong.
Make sure to track that, because it seems like it's an area that definitely needs to mature more as your command matures and as the Air Force improves its ability to do these comprehensive assessments to be able to incorporate the nuclear enterprise.
Absolutely, and bringing that mission threat view of the world, we want to expand that, and we're working closely with Global Strike is bringing some of that mission threat view of their work right now, and we're trying to support them in the work they're doing right now on that, so we're excited about that.
Building on mission threads, probably an incomplete view of mission threat analysis sometimes looks at kill chains, like specific kill chains, and
Yes.
can I connect one sensor, command and control node, and effector, yet you need to fight at enormous scale. The Air Force does, right? We're across theaters at global level, and that imposes challenges both in terms of how do you develop capabilities that are the best capability per dollar, as you were pointing out, in terms of generating effects, but then also in terms of having the scale to be able to build capacity at scale. How are you incorporating scale into some of your analyses?
So, there's kind of two views of the world, right? And in our lexicon, I think with scale, we talk it often about capability and capacity. And there's a balance there. The mission threads tend to be more focused on the capability of, do we have the technological, the organizational ability to produce this effect? We then have to take that and talk about, well, how many times can we do it? How long can we do it for? What environments can we actually execute that? And that becomes a balance between building, if you will, like a MVP, a min viable product, versus building something that we can do at scale and really instantiate in our institution. So we're trying to look at both of those. I'll say initially, quite a bit of the work, it happens based on, we're doing it over different time epochs. So if you look at a time epoch of a mission threat or a kill chain, it is more than just a kill chain, right? That we're trying to close, or an effect we're trying to produce in, say, 27 or 28 in whatever theater, you're fairly constrained in the capacity. I mean, there's not too many levers. We'll talk about a few that we might have, right, in some of the additive manufacturing and changing how we view some of those things. But we pretty much know the Air Force we're going to have, and there'll be some deltas, but they're not huge. So we kind of work within the constraints we understand. When we're doing analysis for 2035, there's a lot more opportunity to change things and to ensure we bring capacity, and it's not just a one-off capability, but it actually is a true capacity that we can bring to the combatant commanders. And one of the things we are looking at in mission threads, if we talk about producing effect in time and space against an adversary, that does not mean putting a weapon that has energetics inside it on a target. It could mean that, but it also could mean just denying the enemy the use of something for the period of time to allow us to achieve our objectives. That could be done through cyber, it could be done through special operations forces, it could be done through the electromagnetic spectrum, it could be done through our counterparts in the Space Force of effects that they can bring to bear. So what we're trying to do is, if we don't have the capacity, or it's very, very expensive to say get to the capacity even when you technologically do it, is there a different way to achieve this effect that allows us to achieve the desired outcome, but at the same time balances our realistic resources across multiple things? And the last point I'll say on that, as opposed to building the best individual widget, and you mentioned I flew F-22 for a few years, so tremendous aircraft. But a lot of the requirements that went into the F-22 built the best possible F-22. It's a little harder to see, I know some of the work you've done, did it build the best fighter to work in the broad enterprise to achieve enterprise outcomes? That's a little bit harder to see, because it has unique support equipment, it has a unique bespoke data link that doesn't talk to anybody else. And that made it the best fighter, and it's amazing, right? But was it the right thing for the entire enterprise? That's harder to say. And maybe we need to, when we're thinking about requirements work as well as mission threads, potentially we need to sub-optimize some of these systems to be just good enough so that the entire enterprise, we can build the right effects across the entire enterprise and balance that. But you need that broader perspective to understand where you can optimize.
Makes a great deal of sense. In terms of optimization, much of the Air Force's analysis has been focused on effectiveness in the air, But I think some of your most severe operational problems today right now are survivability on the ground. The fact that China can bring to bear enormous capacity at great range to destroy aircraft and airfields on the ground. How is ICC trying to account for these cross-portfolio dynamics?
It's an excellent observation. It's not just about the theater you talked about. I think you look at some of the other dynamics we're seeing, whether it's in the Middle East or in Europe, the idea of sanctuary doesn't mean what it used to, right? And especially under the high-end threat environment that we expect that will be required to operate in. So I'm going to go back to mission threads. One of the great parts about taking this kind of system-level view as opposed to individual functions are, once again, if we're optimizing the end of a kill chain, but we can't actually get the aircraft airborne, or we can't get them the fuel they need, or frankly, we don't have a place for the crews to do their work unobstructed by the threat, it really doesn't matter what's at the end of that kill chain, right? So one of the great parts about the mission thread view is, at some point you have to bound the problem, because otherwise you have one mission thread for the entire Air Force that starts at basic training and ends in,
Earth.
some high, yeah,
Earth of a
exactly. So,
pilot.
so you have to make, distinctions there, and you have to, bound the problem. But we specifically bring into these things, though, about the logistics under attack, about the base defense, about how we build more resiliency into the system so that we can get, if it is an airborne effector that's going to close a kill chain, how we get them in the right place at the right level of risk. So we inherently bring in now a view of how we actually generate combat power on the ground. What does it take as far as equipment we need to do that? Is that a better investment than maybe some of the high-end capabilities that we have? We're trying to bring those things together. They never have necessarily been looked at through the same lens before. They've been separate discussions. They must be the same discussion, because it's all about producing the capability at the end. So whether that's common support equipment, whether that's air-based defense, rapid runway repair, whatever, on and on, those must be part of the discussion. We're tying those together inherently.
Great. Wanted to ask you as a follow-up question. The Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hegseth, has mandated these directed cuts or rebalancing or identification of changes within the Air Force budget. Chief of Staff of the Air Force General Alvin has been quite articulate in contending that this is probably a positive opportunity for the Air Force to both rebalance internally, perhaps, but then also to look at budget shares across the department and receive a higher top line. As ICC is doing its work, are you identifying some near-term opportunities to perhaps receive additional funding?
So I think anyone in this business in the Pentagon is always identifying those. If you're doing your bureaucratic job correctly, yes. I mean, it's a unique opportunity right now because there are some of them of just the general change. Certainly, when we look at some of the opportunities, I think the focus of the current administration and some of the things they say, we're fortunate in the Air Force because first off, I think we have a compelling story. I think we're very much part of how we see the future threat environment and security environment. It's really hard to envision how the Air Force doesn't have a very large role, potentially a larger role. So I think we're very well postured for that, and it's a discussion that we want to have. So as General Alvin says, there's always ongoing discussions here. What I'll say in the near term, we're always looking for there's always the traditional discussions going on about a little bit more of this weapon system, a little bit more of that weapon system, end strength, that. But one of the things I think is really exciting is, and again, not just to pander to the crowd, but to go back to some of the work that Hudson has helped the Air Force with the force design. We're really trying to find ways to leverage, some new mission areas for us. I think it's the same mission area, just with different capabilities. But how do we get more into, leveraging some of our non-traditionals? How do we get into a broader defense industrial base? How do we think about additive manufacturing so that we maybe don't have to stockpile as much as we did? We can be part of the rapid fielding with that technology in that space. I'm going to say it changes every 3 to 6 months. I imagine there's people in Europe who would tell you it changes every week from what they're seeing in conflict. But we're really leaning into trying to find opportunities there where we can change some of the cost calculus, do some of that upfront investment. So we have an infrastructure in the Air Force to rapidly onboard these technologies, maybe not by 10,000 or something, but maybe we're in constant procurement of 1,000 of something every 5-6 months, maybe every year. It's a totally different sustainment mentality. We don't have to necessarily sustain these things. You frankly buy it and there's no depot. We have a huge amount of money in our sustainment enterprise, and if we can change those cost curves, we're looking for opportunities. So I think that's one of the unique things beyond kind of the normal, Pentagon business, if you will, that we're excited about and having quite a few conversations about how to leverage some of the unique opportunities with the industry right now.
In terms of other unique opportunities, wanted to ask, the Integrated Capabilities Command is heavily focused in many ways on writing requirements. For better or ill, someone needs to do it, and within the Air Force, ICC is going to be taking this integrated approach to doing it.
Yes.
At the joint level, there's my brilliant colleagues Dan Patt and Bill Greenwald published this report called Required to Fail, and in it they contended that the torturous Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System process, or JCIDS process, needs to be burned to the ground, was the bold language they used, because it really didn't add any value, and removing it wouldn't have any downside. So I'm not going to put you on the spot and say whether that needs to get done, because I know that requires some legislative action that Congress will consider moving forward. But how are you, within the Air Force, trying to accelerate your capability development process and make sure that your resourcing approach also is faster and better?
Thank you. Well, I will not use those exact words, but I will share the sentiment. And it's a pretty safe bet, because it's hard to find too many folks in this town who are defenders of JCIDS, right? The current requirements documentation process that we do in the Department of Defense. First, I'll say broadly, it's actually a pretty exciting time to be doing this, because we see some activity on the Hill with the Forged Act. Some of the executive orders and the guidance that we're getting from the Deputy Secretary of Defense to think differently about this. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to really dramatically change how we do this. So for us, from a requirements perspective, we're trying to privilege, I talked about the mission over function discussion, right? We're trying to communicate both internal to our Air Force, to our labs, to our academic partners, our FFRDC partners, as well as the broader industry. Here are the key problems the Air Force is trying to solve. And we talk about this as a demand signal. It's not a requirements document, but when you read the force design, which is could be a somewhat theoretical in some cases, of aspirational, the North Star, here's where we're going.
Yes.
But now we have to make that real. Well, the demand signal is how we ask our partners and how we develop capability to help us along that path. What we're not doing is saying, we expect to have a widget that is this number of feet long, weighs this amount of money, and your choice if it goes, 0.7 versus 0.8 Mach, you give us your recommendation, right? No, we're trying to say, here's the problem that we're trying to solve, and we need your ideas within these constraints broadly. So that's what we're shifting towards. I think a lot of folks in the department broadly are trying to shift to this, and we're then trying to do it by capabilities and kind of portfolios. So we are currently shifting to a portfolio view. And what this does for us is, I won't bore you with a whole org chart discussion of how we've arranged ICC, but we've tried to build some internal tension into the organization from day one. So we have a kind of horizontal mission thread view of the world that will highlight some gaps that we need to get after. We also have this deep functional expertise that often referred to as stovepipes. That tends to be pejorative. But there's deep expertise that lives within those functional communities. We have to keep that. We have to keep our warfighter, those of us advocating for modernization, and those who have to sustain our systems connected. We can't rip them apart. So I think about lowering the silos, if you will, maybe making them deeper ponds, but having them all connected to the enterprise. So now we have this capability development. That's where our requirements work is happening, right? So we're tied into the warfighter, to the combatant commands, now have a clear voice of how they feed into the Air Force system through the front door, as well as the IPL process and JUONs if they choose to do those things. But we now build that kind of tie to requirements. And then, as I mentioned, we have the same folks, the same organization now talking about how do we resource that and how do we make it real. So I think there's great opportunity. I think more and more we see, especially with the speed of some of the things we're trying to do, less on the spec and more on the outcome, and that's exactly what the chief has tasked us to look at inside ICC. And we talked to our counterparts at OSD. they kind of go, yes, we should do that. So I think there's strong support in this town. We'll see where it ends up, but I'm actually quite optimistic on this front.
Excellent. I listened to the podcast you did with Vago Muradian yesterday on this subject. Vago has a fantastic defense and aerospace report podcast that I commend to everyone. Within it, you also talked about, I guess, the role of normalizing threat assumptions and baselines so you can actually improve your level of analysis. Can you expound a little bit on that, please?
Absolutely, and what I'm going to talk about here, I imagine for those of you who are not in the defense space, this is normal for any discussion, as far as an analytical approach in any business you'd be in. But we have to have a common baseline. And what we have found is a lot of people will do analysis and say, this thing or this system performs this way against this threat in this time epoch. And then the next folks who brief you will tell you exactly the same thing, except we're going to use a slightly different year, and we use slightly different threat assumptions, wildly different outcomes. And it's hard to tell if the outcome is different because of the assumptions or it's because of, they found a key insight. So what we're trying to do is when we talk about mission threads and when we talk about with our acquisition community, we're trying to use a common threat baseline. It could be wrong, but then we know what place we're applying deltas to, we're deviating from. And then we understand we're controlling the number of variables. And I am not an ops researcher or an analyst by trade, but we're trying to build that baseline so we can have a common discussion. And we shouldn't, every step of the process, have a different threat assumption, or at least we certainly shouldn't do it without it being purposeful. So that's where we're trying to build that common threat picture and say this is the threat that we're going to build towards, that we're going to optimize our force against. And then we're constantly assessing, going back at our assumptions and the facts or changes in the space of, hey, do we need to do deltas to this? Do we need to change our approach? But if we make a common set of assumptions, this goes back to a core underpinning of force design, that we need to have it be stable enough where small changes in the threat don't upend your complete force design. Major geopolitical changes, maybe that does, or massive changes in the fiscal environment. But it should be fairly resilient to those things, but it all comes back to that common baseline so we understand what we're building our force on and when and if we need to deviate.
Perfect. I want to open up the floor to our conference participants. Before doing so, though, I wanted to ask you a final question on, you shared better approaches by which the government can communicate internally, and you're trying to normalize your analyses, improve your analyses in different ways. How can industry better communicate to you? What's useful to your organization in terms of constructive analytic inputs and maybe what's not helpful?
Great, I appreciate the question. So at the Apex conference yesterday where I spoke to the crowd and talked to Vago afterwards, that was one of my questions to the crowd, is to try to get feedback on how we do that. One of the key things I talked about earlier was this idea of an integrated demand signal. And so it's really important that we need to communicate in a consistent single voice from the Air Force to industry. They understand the key problems we're trying to solve, not force them to go around to 9 different commands to get 30 different answers, and they have to try to figure out how to organize a business strategy around that. So we're trying really hard to give a consistent voice with our partners in the Integrated Development Office that's being stood up at Wright-Patterson. Miss Amanda Gentry is my battle buddy on that. So we are working towards this integrated demand signal. When we produce that, it will lay out the key problems that we're trying to solve over different time epochs. And because of the way we set up the organization, you can now see the connection from the force design, now through the demand signal, the requirements to support that, which are being written by ICC, spread around several different locations, and now our resourcing recommendations. So you now can see a path from force design, and if you were, say, trying to get investment for your idea, of how you actually bridge the SBIRS valley or the SBIRS purgatory and actually get a program of record and having much better conversion rates on that. So what I ask for industry out of that is we need your feedback on the demand signal, first off. When we get that out there, and we're pending the confirmation of a new secretary who's going to make some decisions, confirm that we're all on the right path as the Air Force, and obviously it makes sense for major changes, structural changes in the Air Force, that the new administration and the new secretary should have a voice in that. Once that, whatever path decides to go, you would expect the Air Force will put out a demand signal, hopefully in the fall is what we're aiming for, and then we're going to need that feedback. And we're going to need the analytical support, because industry has phenomenal analytical tools, better in many cases than we have inside DoD, at least for certain pieces. So we're working with our folks in Materiel Command to understand how we ingest those and how we bring them in to add to our analysis. So that's